Thank you so much. And first, I want to thank Oluchi, Angel, and Isa for joining me. They're also iconic leaders in the movement on a national level and on a local level. Oluchi, you have deep roots in Minneapolis, now also in Houston. But both Isa and Angel are huge local leaders from San Francisco who've been doing the work here for a long time.
I'm a trans elder now.
You and me both. The gray hair.
I'm just an old lady.
And you're organizing space, culture, and communities across the country for migrant and indigenous folks. So thank you so much for your work. And today the name of the panel, Borders Crossed Us, recognizing the fact that these borders are things that have been constructed, that were imposed on us. And there are borders that are both like about nation states. There are also borders that are rules around like productivity and what you like around disability and around like who we are and what we need to do to be able to sort of like participate in capitalism. There's rules, right, around norms around gender and sexuality. These are all different kinds of like borders around exclusion. And the three of you all are doing work finding ways to break that and to resist that. And so I wanted to give each of you, maybe start with you, Oluchi, since you're right here, to talk about your work that is also new for, I feel like, the country, like the Black LGBTQIA plus Migrant Project is a first of its kind. And talk about it, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, y'all. It is so cold in this room. So if y'all can like keep laughing and breathing hot air at me, that would be great. Well, my name is Luci. I use any pronouns. BLMP is definitely the first of its kind organization, which stands, as folks have heard, for the Black LGBTQIA plus Migrant Project. It is a mouthful, so you can just say BLMP. And so BLMP actually came together kind of at the rise of, at this iteration of the Black Lives Matter movement, or the movement for Black liberation, in a time in which the visibility of police violence was more heightened and also just like being talked about on an interpersonal level. And what a lot of Black activists were seeing in that moment is that, one, there was an erasure of Black migration and Black migrants at the movement level within the immigration space, and yet a lot of the folks that were leading the work within the Black Lives Matter movement were either folks that were migrants themselves or folks that were recently descendants from folks that have migrated. So myself, I was born in the great state of Minnesota, go Lynx, and I was organizing with people that were also either like me or migrants themselves, but we were still organizing on behalf of Black movement. And when we saw violence that was happening on the Black migrant scale, we weren't actually able to gather the same amount of energy around Black migrant folks that were experiencing violence. And then on top of that, thinking about LGBTQ identity, in places that we're coming from, like a lot of folks here, where Christian imperialism has really erased a lot of our indigenous sexuality and gender. And so, one, when I was a kid, I did not think that I could be both LGBTQ and African. I rejected my sexuality and my gender at that point. And it wasn't until I started organizing with other folks where I realized that it was possible. And that possibility is what really created BLMP, is like that feeling of not feeling alone. And BLMP continues to create a political home and space for Black folks, for Black migrant folks who have lost their ancestral homes due to Christian imperialism and are trying to build a world in which their homes are celebrated. So I'll pause there and I'll pass it.
Batiush, Nidala, Angel Constantino Fabian Vera, Nidala, Atla Palot. Hello again, everyone. My name is Angel Angel Ortlawis. It is he, she, they pronouns. Maybe Benza or Beniza from the high mountains of Oaxaca. And I have the great privilege, honor, and responsibility of being the executive director of Bates, the Bay Area American Indian Two Spirits. And we have been around for 26 years now. And for the first 23 years, we were solely run as a volunteer-run organization, which is unheard of. But we are not the first indigenous organization here in the Bay Area. I don't know how many of you know about the takeover of Alcatraz through the American Indian Movement. But right after, in 1976, this organization called the Gay American Indians came to be. And they did some really amazing work around creating space and place that was challenging both to the American Indian community and to the LGBT community. And creating that space for us to be able to create Bates. We were founded through prayer. And we were founded to ensure we could restore and recover the roles of Two-Spirit and Indigenous queer community members back into the sacred circle. And doing that through, now we do that through advocacy, wellness programming, and cultural and ceremonial work that we do with community and by community. I think the reason that I'm in this panel, and thank you for that, is that part of the story of the new diaspora that is now a part of the indigenous and pan-indigenous movements here in the Bay Area. By the way, this is one of the largest concentrations of indigenous nations, that have nation-to-nation relationship to the United States. So it's beyond it's beyond racial boundaries. It goes into political relationships from one nation, sovereign nation, to another. And so we have a lot of representatives here from those nations. And then migration has happened because of globalization. And a lot of indigenous folks from the global south have landed here in the Bay Area. Me being one of them, and my family being one of them. And I can share with you briefly that I have had the honor and privilege of reconnecting with my parents' hometown in Oaxaca. And what I've learned over the years has been that you can no longer grow corn in their town. That was their main staple. And that was the way that they were able to sustain their families. And so what that has caused, because, the weather has just changed, and maybe it's global warming, maybe not. But that forced migration impacts communities, indigenous communities, in ways unimaginable. Because that forced migration throws you into cities that are pretty harsh on indigenous communities, especially if you don't know the dominant language. And so they become so insular just to protect themselves. And then they migrate to the US. And then here, it's also a struggle to connect and to belong. I'll end with this because I know that our panel time is short. What we call northern relatives, we call them relatives north of the medicine line. And we call our southern relatives of the southern medicine line. We had relationships with community and among each other long before colonizers did what they did. And so I think that the recent attacks around the recent ICE attacks and ICE raids have impacted indigenous communities. And indigenous communities are showing up and organizing. We host the largest gathering of Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer community members. We welcome every year to the Bates Powwow anywhere from 4,000 to 5,000 folks to San Francisco, to Fort Mason. And for the last 2 years, we've had to implement ICE protocols because we know that we need to keep our community safe. It's our responsibility. Yeah.
Well, before we continue and I share the work, I just want to honor the leadership of Angel Fabian. I mean, it's so special for me to be next to you, and you were formative in my, in thinking about where I got my organizing chops. It was here in San Francisco and in the Mission neighborhood, and you were part of one of the leaders that I looked up to, and I continue to look up to and see, and so. It's special that after all these years that we're, sharing this panel. And thank you, Masil, for organizing us. Mm-hmm. I know sometimes these things can get tricky. Yeah. But I think this conversation is so timely because of just, I don't have to tell you all what's going on in the news. I mean, today's Supreme Court decisions, the ICE raids, the court decisions in Texas, the charges against protesters. It's just incessant and it's endless, the barrage of news that we are impacted by as community. And I think I remember in the early days of organizing in the Mission neighborhood with trans migrants that really nobody paid attention to the work that we were doing. And it was through our advocacy of HIV here in San Francisco that we said the needs of the community are so much more than just a condom and a drop-in center. And so we quickly organized, and I think that's when I kind of saw oh wait, San Francisco does not have a plan for trans immigrants here in the city, even though so many folks, including my uncle who migrated from Comitán, Chiapas to San Francisco as a gay man in the 90s, 30 years old, ended up here undocumented and realized there are very limited resources for gay men who are undocumented and don't speak English. Mm-hmm. And I think I wanted to bring that because that's the legacy. That's kind of what is at the forefront of even today, right? That our project, the Border Butterfly Project, we're based out of Tijuana, and we work on both sides of the borders, helping asylum seekers and LGBT queer and trans migrants figure out how to stay safe at the end of the day, whether it's staying in Mexico or figuring out how to support them in their whatever journey that they're on at this moment, which is pretty limited because of the federal government's decision, this administration's attack on asylum law, mm-hmm. which is decades, embedded in and it goes against international law. Today's Supreme Court decision goes against all of our values as a society, and I think we have a big undertaking in the next decades, I would say, to undo this mess. Yeah. And I think conversations like this are just one part of what it's going to take to really, really think through what is really going to take for our communities to stay safe. And I think, yes, we've been there before. Yes, we've been underfunded, but I think there is there is a shift happening. And I think it's going to take a little bit more creative and a little more rigor to ground ourselves in terms of possibility. Because yes, I think we have the stamina. I think we've shown as a trans community, as queer communities, as migrant communities, that we can support and build in community support and think about safety plans and think about individual plans. But I think with these policies, with the budgets that have been unleashed to ICE, endless resources, billions of dollars. And I say all that because even, on my way here, I received a phone call from a trans woman who's in detention in Oklahoma. She's with a group of 3 other trans women, and it's an overcrowded facility. They're being placed with men because one of the first things that the federal government decided to do was to say that there's only 2 genders. Mm-hmm. And so then that logic model then impacted federal detention facilities and policy. And so all of the trans protections that we had been fighting for were quickly out the door. The trans care memo that was established under Obama was out the door. So I think I say all that because it sits heavy in our hearts. We receive these calls every single day from people inside detention, from trans people, from trans women who are humiliated, who are degraded, who are experiencing sexual violence. And there is no accountability mechanism, because at the end of the day, ICE has a mandate to detain and deport people, and detention centers are profiting off human suffering every single day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you, Isa. Yeah, I am extremely honored to have all three of you here, and as you can hear, I can't overstate the immense gravity of the work that you all are doing right now and the weight that holds, and how critical and important it is for all of us to be able to support each other. I think, Angel, you told a story about indigenous communities making safety plans around ICE to protect our communities, recognizing that both right now ICE is targeting indigenous communities as well, and that indigenous communities are coming from not just the U.S., right, but across the country, not across the country, but across the world.
Yeah.
And so that's a moment where you showed sort of both solidarity, and that's also necessary for self-protection. And one thing that I really love about the work that Border Butterflies is doing and BLMP is doing too is that you all are working very closely together. And, recognizing that within our communities, we have had our struggles around anti-Blackness, that's real. And so there's an important need to focus on Black migrants. But you are figuring out ways to show solidarity across difference. And I was wondering if one of you would like to speak about another sort of examples of where you've seen that solidarity and resistance that brings you hope.
Yeah, I can start. I got my organizing start in Minneapolis and have lived in Minneapolis for most of my life. Moved out of Minneapolis about 2 years ago. But Operation Metro Surge at the beginning of the year was only a failure because of the deep solidarity that was built through decades of organizing in Minneapolis, Minnesota, right? And so when we think about the safety networks that were created, it wasn't just immigrant folks were looking out for immigrant folks. It was folks within the immigrant rights movement, labor, it was the Black movement, it was the nurses, it was the teachers, that all came together to counteract against ICE in that moment in Minneapolis. We had the punks out in downtown Minneapolis doing block-by-block surveillance. They had blockades that they created and that were no ICE zones. I was in 9 different text message threads on Signal that were very heavily vetted, but they were okay, this is what's happening on this block. ICE was spotted here, ICE was spotted there. And that took community effort, right? And the community outside of the community that was directly affected. There were 2 murders that happened in Minneapolis by the hands of ICE at that time. Both of those folks were white folks. White folks that put their bodies on the line to make sure their migrant neighbors were okay, right? And so that is the level of solidarity, the level of active participation that is necessary to keep our people safe, right? We talk a lot about BBP and BLMP, and me and Isa's relationship existed before either of these organizations did. But because of our relationship, because of the solidarity that Isa has towards my community and that I have towards hers, we understand that our liberation is intrinsically linked, and know that me working for the liberation of Latinx folks that are not Black, that are LGBTQ, is the same as it is for me, and vice versa. And so I think, and specifically in this time, and I'm specifically also speaking to the cis-identifying people and the non-migrant folks, is what do you need to do inside of yourself to make yourself a little less comfortable so that your trans siblings and your migrant siblings are more safe? what is that going to have to, what do you want to give up personally in your own comfort so that people can see what liberation looks like?
I mean, I'll just say quickly that, I mean, I think California, in particular San Francisco, I mean, there's just decades of organizing relationship history that we can point to. There's so many examples of how Black and Brown unity has happened here in the city and in Oakland, the East Bay, and in California. When I think about Prop 87, when I think about the level of organizing that happened there, that was Black and Brown unity. You know, I just think when there's been crisis, and when I think about who was at the forefront of those fights, it was Black and Brown folks who were really leading the charge. And we stand off that, the examples are there, right? And so it's like, I think for us, it's kind of continue to dig into that, to remember the past, to understand also where there were some mistakes, where there were things where we missed each other. I don't think also all the elders had all the answers either, and I think that's where it's our turn, and it's the onus is on us as a community in thinking about the possible futures that we want to create. And I think that they've done their work. Trans elders have done their work. When I think about Felicia Flames, who paz descanse, she. So many folks, there's so many examples here in the city that I think we can start there as a starting place in terms of what they did and how they built those relationships. Because when those moments of attack happen, it isn't those things move fast. Mm-hmm. The rapid response networks that need to be enacted in those times happen like that. And so if you don't have those relationships built in, and I think it depends on the city, and I think it depends on how the city is thinking about its how it's embedded in its policy and in its budget as well.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if you all are aware, but an anniversary is coming up, 250. And it's been for close to 250 years, if not more, that American Indian, Native American communities have been fighting imperialism in this land, in your own backyard. And so I think that going back to indigenous values, where we are all related in some way, shape, or form, and that is our responsibility to take care of one another. I think that that it's easy to forget that the basics of organizing. And I'm an old lady, and when I first started organizing, an elder in the East Palo Alto community said to me, "Why are you here? If you're here to save me, child, you got something coming. But if you're here to heal yourself, let's do this." A lot of times, younger organizers and folks really passionate about the movement work that they're doing, they'll reach out and say, "You have to support us, and you have to share this, and you have to share that." And I'm like, how have you shown up for us? Don't expect anyone to show up for you unless you have shown up for them first. And in saying that comes, again, a lot of responsibility. How do we show up right? How do we ask the questions? How do we not assume that we know what the struggles are or the intricacies, I walked into this role with 23 years at that point of story of Bates. And I got approached with everything. And then I had to go to the elders and say, "I wasn't around 10, 15 years ago. What happened?" And take that, and move it forward. I am super hopeful, although it's at times really daunting, everything that's happening and how fast it's happening. I'm super hopeful. I'm super hopeful because the conversations are happening, the networking is happening. We are reaching across each other's through gender lines, through social, through all of it, and. And there's a concept right now in the indigenous community talking about futurism. We see a future for us because all the attempts of erasure
Have failed.
because we are still here.
I just really quickly, and when I think about what we're up against, I think about the billions of dollars of budgets that ICE has versus our nonprofits and grassroots organizing efforts and, drag race fundraisers that we do. And I think I'm not trying to minimize that at all because I think there is that's how communities have survived, and there is some magic in that as well because we've been able to withstand the level of resourcing against these systematic erasure and just wiping of our people, right? We've still persevered. We're still finding our folks, even inside detention centers and systems that they don't want any, that are dark pits of despair right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And also thank you for that beautiful, beautiful story. I was in the last 5 minutes of Raquel's talk today, and one of the questions that was asked to her was around how do you stay hopeful in this time? And Raquel's answer was essentially we talk a lot about how we won't see liberation in our lifetime, and I've took it upon myself to reframe my thinking around that and talk about what liberation can I feel in this moment. And because I always say that too. I'm I know I'm not going to see liberation, but I know that I'm working towards something. But it made me think about actually though, there have been liberatory moments in my life, and also this future that I am envisioning also people experience pain. It's not people experience hardship, people experience conflict, but the ways in which we move through it is different. And I say that it just made me think about. This time I'm not going to cry, Issa, because I did cry on the panel that we had before. I went back to Nigeria for the first time in my parents' indigenous home for the first time in 20 years. This was when I was a little girl and pre-transition. And when I was going back, I was really afraid because obviously I work at BLMP. Literally, my members are coming to BLMP and coming to the United States because of patriarchal violence and the rejection of their sexuality or gender. And so me knowing that I'm going back to a place in which they knew me as someone that quote unquote was not me, I was afraid, right? And I remember I had a lot of anxiety. I had to go because my sister was getting married. Shout out to my sister getting married. But yeah, I felt very heavy anxiety. And I remember my dad pulled me aside. Mind you, this is the same dad that was when I came out or was forced out, he was you can't be a lesbian because that doesn't run in my family. He pulled me aside 20 years later and he was I know that you're feeling anxious, and I want you to know that because this is my home, this is your home. Which, I never expected him to say ever, but it allowed me to breathe way deeper than I had breathed in the last 20 years. And not only that, the folks that were living in the village that are still in Nigeria, they were yeah, we were sad that you didn't come out because I was drinking palm wine with them at that point. And they're yeah, we were wondering why you wouldn't come out because you were the one child when you came here 20 years ago that said that you didn't want to leave, that you said that you loved Nigeria and that you never wanted to leave. And so your parents have been talking to us about all of the things that you do. We watch all of your speeches, which is wild because they're all bad, but they're we watch everything that you do, and we want to let you know that we support you and we love you. And yeah, they don't understand what the trans person is or what that means, but it gave me hope that I actually created the world in which I wanted to live as a child, which is like really deep, right? And so like when we think about like indigeneity, when we think about home, when we think about being at home in our bodies, being at home in like our ancestral land, I know that it's possible and it's happening. And so like as much money as they have, as much like vitriol that they throw at us, we are inevitable and we are still here. And the ways that we are working towards a future is what is going to continue for us to be here.
Exactly.
I did cry a little bit. Not as much as I did before, though.
Thank you so much. That was really beautiful. Yeah, and then still I'm like gushing about being up here with you all, because you're the movement. You're part of the movement. You're bringing people in with you, and I wanted to now sort of like we're nearing our end sadly, but I wanted to take a moment to really also, for me, be in awe and honor that we are just preceding the incredible, the also legendary, iconic Dolores Huerta. And Oluchi, you talked about sort of what it meant for you to go back home and the space that your father helped create for you and how deep that was. And I thought about Dolores and sort of like the role that she's played in my life. When I was an undergrad at the University of Oregon, I was a young one. It was a while ago, maybe see. But I was, at that point, I was one of two out people who was a person of color who was active in the student unions. I was active in the LGBTQIA. I was active in the Oregon Students of Color Coalition. I was a mechista. Where I got, yes, mecha. And this is where I got to learn about Dolores Huerta and her legacy and all the work that she's done for farm workers, for migrant workers. And I remember it was a tough time because I was one of two and people weren't out. And for 1 year for the Oregon Student, OSOC, that's, that's the Oregon Student of Color Coalition. We did a conference every year, and 1 year we brought Dolores Huerta. And when she came, she spoke about the importance of solidarity, and she spoke about her support for LGBTQIA people and communities, and that we're part of it. And she made it possible at that conference. She created a space for me, and she made it not okay to be homophobic or transphobic. And so she created a space for me to exist and to flourish. And to me, that's one of the legacies that she has had because she created that space for us. And so I wanted to ask if each of you would maybe say a little bit about what she means to you as like a welcoming her, so that she also gets to have her flowers and hear the role that she's played in our lives.
I'll start that one because I grew up in the migrant labor camps in the Central Valley of California. And I was able to attend a lot of UFW events while I was there because my mother, she was, I can blame her for being, as active in community as I am right now. And I've gotten, over the years, I've been able to, when I was organizing in Los Angeles, was able to march alongside Dolores at the Second Iraq War demonstration in the Pico Union Westlake community. So there's certain pillars in community that that withstand, time. She came to the National Yugo Conference, in Chicago, which is the national, now defunct, Latinx organization, national organization that existed. And so her presence and her trajectory, and her advocacy, and her embracement of community has been critical to many of us in the work that we continue moving forward. I'll stop there.
Yeah, a lot of my recognition comes from learning through, not with Dolores. I think the biggest thing that comes up for me is like, just because you feel lonely doesn't mean that you're ever alone. And that like, you don't have to actually identify with the struggle in order to be in active solidarity in that struggle. And then what does that mean then for my organizing and how I'm in active solidarity with other folks that I do not identify with? I think the story that I named before, like, it really brings up like, no one is beyond redeemable. I used to think that I would never be able to have that conversation with my parents or my homeland, and that was possible. It took a long time, but like conversations are never too old to be had, and it takes bravery and strength in order to continue living your life authentically while also giving space for folks to come to you. And yeah, I'm not discounting how much energy that took for Dolores, but also knowing like that it was important to hold what she did and name what she did.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think Dolores is like, you know, the lineage of chingonas that I look up to as a trans Latina. Like, I mean, es la mera chingona, you know? And I mean, unfortunately, like trans Latina women there wasn't a lot of opportunities to have a lot of ancestors and elders because of how the violence that surrounds trans women of color, Black trans women, Latina trans women. And I think, you know, as a kid, reaped the benefits of the struggle. You know, I was part of migrant education in the Central Valley too, in Fresno. And my parents, you know, the spirit that they instilled of si se puede, you know, y hay que echarle ganas. Like, I am a part of that lineage, and I think strong Latina women have always been a part of my life, and have taught me so much in terms of grace under fire. Y hay que echarle ganas. And I think to me that is like what the spirit that I continue to do in the work, that whether it's at the border in Tijuana, whether it's in a detention center, or whether it's in advocacy or fundraising, or even at a funeral. Like, I think so much of the work that we've done here in San Francisco, what we've done at the border, what we've done internationally, that solidarity, that spirit carries throughout. And I'm so honored to be a part of that. I think I get emotional in thinking about all that she has had to hold, and so much of our leaders have to hold and suffer through that people will never know, and it comes with a cost. And so I think, to me, so many of the lessons that have been shared over the years is a huge generosity. It comes from a place of generosity that is immense. So. I'm just grateful to be here to share this moment with y'all as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And what's incredible is that she's built a movement, and we can learn strategy from the movements that she's built. But I think she has also teaches us who we can become as people and as humans. So that's big. So thank you, Dolores. So one quick thing to welcome her. I also want to bring Olga into the room. We have another legend here who has created space for so many of us. So I wanted to do like sort of the proper invitation, welcome to Dolores. And so just quick, Olga Talamante is also iconic legend here in San Francisco. She founded the Chicana Latina Foundation. Escaped political persecution, and someone that I admire, and also incredibly generous with your advice and your love and your time. So thank you. So, and the reason why I brought her up too is that to welcome Dolores, I thought we should do the most, to me, appropriate way that I can think of how is by doing the unity clap, the farm workers clap together. If you would like, you can stand and join us.
Yeah.
She's about to come in, or she's coming in, yeah.
So just so you
Go
know,
ahead.
we start slow. We start slow with a clap, and it builds up. And I think that's such a great image for what we need to do. Even if we start slow, we're gonna end up strong.
Period.
Okay. And then while she's coming in, I'll let you know. I was a student at UC Santa Cruz. I had been part of the farm worker movement. Oh, UC some slugs over here, and as people were talking about the farm worker movement and organizers were going to Delano and stuff, and they would come back and was like, well, tell us about it. Said, the one person that the growers are most afraid of, because she's the fiercest negotiator, is Dolores Huerta. So I wanted to share. So I heard that when my first year in college, I go, well, okay, that's what I want to follow, And so anyway, I just thank you myself for bringing me up here. It's such a joy to be here, and I think as soon as she's ready, we're gonna start clapping.
We have one speaker right before Dolores.
Oh,
Yeah.
well,
But we can do.
let's do it still.
We
Or-
can do the clap. Yeah.
Yeah.
The warm. Get the room warm.
Get the-
Yeah.
Okay, so
Ready?
Yes.
¡Se puede!
¡Sí se puede!
¡Se puede!
¡Sí se puede!
¡Se puede!
¡Sí se puede!
Escúchame, Santino.
One more round of applause for our amazing speakers, Maceo, Aluchi, Isa, Angel, and our legend, Olga.